Some big contracts were handed out on the recruiting trail, and I know a lot of Oklahoma fans are saying, well, why aren't we spending the money? Let's take a look at that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there tuning in. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This might be a good question to ask Brent Venables and company if we get the chance at SEC Media Days that is next week in Atlanta, Georgia. We'll both be there covering the Sooners and covering college football. So hopefully we'll get a chance to ask about these big contracts that are being handed out across college football. Jay, Felix Ojo was the one that caught everybody's attention late last week when he committed to the Texas Tech Red Raiders, reportedly signed a 3-year deal for a little over $5 million. Now it came out a little bit later that a lot of that was incentivized. So I'm sure starts, playing time, all that's going to be factored in. If he wins, conference awards, All-American awards, things like that, he'll get paid a little bit more. And then the other one that happened over the weekend was Syracuse landing a 5-star wide receiver. And I can't find
Calvin Russell.
There you go, Calvin Russell. I had the wrong text thread pulled up. Calvin Russell also getting paid a little over $4 million to go to the Syracuse Orange. Jay, what do you think of these big contracts that are being handed out right now?
It's fascinating that, one, I love that every single article that has come out around these, or let me rephrase that. I love that how every single tweet and post about these contracts have been the big number that will get everybody's attention. 3-year deals, $5.1 million, 3-year deals, $4.3 million, without the actual, reading the fine details of how we get to that actual number. So the Felix Ojo deal is actually a 3-year, $775,000 a year contract, which gets you well under 5.1. But the language in the contract, because this is a revenue share contract too. This is not even NIL. This is just rev share. And what that does is that in the language, it allows for them to be able to move the value up. They have a verbal agreement to escalate that amount if there's minimal regulation around the salary cap. So if the salary cap isn't truly regulated, in which we don't expect the NCAA to do their actual job in that, or Deloitte or whoever they have out there looking at NIL deals, we don't expect none of this stuff to actually be regulated. Because of that, they're going to be able to exceed that number and push it up to 5.1. So it's a chance of it getting to 5.1, but it doesn't mean that he's going to actually make that kind of money. They're also pushing a similar deal to 2027 5-star offensive lineman Cooper Hatchett out of Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. So another OK prep that's going to end up leaving the state because they're throwing all of these absurd amount of money at him. Guess what? That's really the only guys they're doing that for. We're not seeing them do this for a whole bunch of dudes. They did this with Micah Hudson a couple years ago. Kid transferred out and transferred back in. What a dramatic situation, right? You're seeing schools like Syracuse and Texas Tech really, they're throwing a Hail Mary in these situations. And I know Oklahoma Sooner fans are asking the question, will Oklahoma do something like that? We got Michael Fasusi. So, yeah, we're going to do that, but it's going to have to make sense. We're not going to just do it frivolously for a player if we don't feel like they're one that's worth it. You might think Felix Ojo's worth it as a fan. I watch videos of Jake Krell cook them, and it made me feel like I don't think that he'd be worth that. Now, if he goes out there and shows up and shows out, then you can't question what Texas Tech did there. But they did that same thing with Kennedy, the pitcher in softball. They're going out there to make a statement, to get their name out there, to get their brand out there, to even get their donors to understand, hey, jump in the game because we're going to get name recognition with this, and hope that long term they get something out of it. But John, I think the one thing that we have to recognize here and see is this is a revenue share contract. This is all within the rev share. So with them giving him just under, giving him $750,000 out of the $18 million that they're going to be paying out, They're going to have to find value in all those other positions. Mm-hmm. How does that look for their roster going forward?
If you're going to pay anybody, offensive tackle is certainly who you're going to pay.
Exactly.
If you're Syracuse, if you're going to pay somebody, wide receiver is one of those positions that makes a lot of sense to pay. It's part of that money 5. If you haven't heard that language before, it comes from the NFL ranks. You pay the 5 most important positions on the football field. That's quarterback, wide receiver, cornerback, defensive end, and offensive tackle. Basically, everybody that is involved in the passing game.
Yeah.
The most important positions involved in the passing game. Will Oklahoma follow that same model? That'd be a great question for Jim Nagy. Coming from the NFL ranks, having a lot of experience with the NFL, is that something he ascribes to as the money 5? You could throw defensive tackle into that at the collegiate level. You can throw running back into that at the collegiate level because they still hold a lot of value because you can only find so many like truly great ones. Back to this, like so much of what Oklahoma is going to do when it comes to rev share, NIL, paying players, a lot of it's going to have to do with the right person, not just the best player, a great player. It's going to be the right people. It's going to be guys that are truly culture fits that aren't going to be coming back to the table like a Nico Iamaleava after 1 year and say, hey, I want more. They're not going to be guys that you have to worry about necessarily holding out. Guys that you're going to have to worry about bolting for the next transfer portal opportunity. They're going to look for the right guys. And I know we just want the best guys. Totally get that. At the same time, how much do you want your program dealing with renegotiations all the time? And thankfully, the coaching staff isn't going to have to be a part of that anymore because you have a general manager and a front office staff that's going to handle all those contract negotiations. But some of that stuff, man, those locker room cancers are a real thing in professional sports. How much more will they impact a collegiate locker room?
And that's what we're about to find out. And I think that a lot of us fans, I'm including myself as all of us, as fans and viewers of the game, that we have a tendency of missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
So we're seeing everything right in front of us, and we just want to lose our minds behind it. Like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? I want more. Give me more. I want cake now. All of that stuff comes out of us in a situation where this is not something that's a day, like a instant fix. I put it to you this way. You don't want a bunch of freshmen playing on your roster day one. You don't. You want those players to get a couple of years in, and then you have a bunch of juniors playing together. Then you'd be excited. But for today, this is the one thing when it comes to the recruiting philosophy where I expect Oklahoma to spend a whole bunch of money in comparison to going after high schoolers, transfer portal. That's why you had Jim Nagy. That's why you had Lake Dawson. You have those guys that will find, I put it this way, when Jim Nagy finds you a Jared Verse, when Jim Nagy finds you a Trey Harris. Now, if you don't know, Trey Harris was at Louisiana Tech, went to Ole Miss, was one of the biggest wide receiver threats in the SEC when he was healthy last year. When they find you dudes like that, a Verse, a Trey Harris, someone that comes out of nowhere and just dominates, then you will all be quiet about it. Then you're going to be like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. We wanted Trey Harris when he was in the portal because you saw the talent there. And then he went out there for 2 years and was cooking over there at Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. That's what you want. And I 100% expect Jim Nagy to do that for us here. Just as I stated last segment, do not forget, where do you think Jaden Ott came from? Wasn't from the eyes of this staff, and it's nothing against his staff not seeing it. It's more so this staff has they sometimes are also missing the forest for the trees because they're looking at what's right there in front of them when they're looking for certain players. This staff has been scouting all of the big name players and the players they feel like will be breakouts for a while. That was the job of the Senior Bowl, is finding players that are underappreciated and not and completely overlooked, or for the most part overlooked. Either one of the two. Get them that national attention in this bowl game. Get them drafted a lot higher than they would have if they didn't have the exposure. That's what the staff's going to find for us. So keep that in mind when you complain about how the high school recruiting is going. I promise you, when you get players like a Jaden Ott, you recognize, oh, you're playing a different type of game. And that's going to be it. I talked about it in the episode last week, John. I can see us having a 50-50 split of transfers and high school players playing on a regular basis. Why? Because it only makes sense to go after dudes that you've seen produce already.
We're going to have to discuss that maybe on tomorrow's show a little bit, because I was listening to all those shows last week and a lot of great stuff from Jay. I certainly have my own thoughts on some of that as well. And I think it'd be a good little back and forth to kind of rehash and recap some of what you discussed. I'm not going to fight with Jay. We're not going to do that.
We're going to fight. We're totally going to fight.
Island.
Violence.
I'm positive vibes only. Like it's island vibes over here on Locked On Sooners. But no, we'll have to discuss that, because I think it is a good ongoing discussion, because as Jim Nagy's time at Oklahoma lengthens, we're going to see this plan and the strategy unfurl and unveil itself even more. And we'll get a little bit more insight into that, but we'll continue to talk Oklahoma recruiting strategy on this week's show. And we'll have, some recruiting decisions coming up in the next week as well that are going to be pretty impactful. Where does Oklahoma stand in some of those? We'll discuss as well. And we're like less than a month from fall camp. So like things are heating up. The 2025 college football season will be here before we know it. So thank you so much for being a part of Locked On Sooners, tuning in every single day. And thank you for downloading the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you go follow Jay at Unfair Sports. Go check out his channel, Unfair Sports, over on YouTube. You can follow me at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. The show is at Locked On Sooners on all of your favorite social media platforms. And for your second listen, go check out The Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. That's another thing, man. We got to potentially discuss who could be some of these like late portal additions with the brief portal window that's going to be right before the season. Did you saw that note where they?
Yeah, I saw that. That's the one thing they're working on. So let's see what that's going to
We might have to chop that up and discuss who might be a late portal entry that might affect Oklahoma. But yeah, go check out The Portal Show with Brian Smith, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But until next time, he's Jay, I'm John, Boomer
Sooner.